All right. Hey, good morning to all. I'm Dr. Pete Patitsas. Everyone knows me as Pete. I have the great honor of interviewing Father Deacon Ananias, and I have come across his content, in twofold. I mean, who hasn't come across it? But Patristic Faith on YouTube, and of course on X, he has a very dynamic, position and presence. And in fact, that's how I really got connected with you, Father, was discovering you online. I think you might have broken a bone or two not so long ago, and we'll probably have to get a little update about your recovery. But that's actually one of the exciting parts I wanted to explore today, was a little bit of that intersection between the soul and the body, between, let's say, the hospital of the soul and the hospital of the body, and how those are interconnected. And I would like to say are certainly complementary and shouldn't be put against one another, which I think is something we can explore today. But Father, thank you so much for being on here. Do you mind introducing yourself a little bit and telling us where you're calling in from and what parishes you might serve?
Yes, so I'm in the capital of the state of Montana. The capital is Helena, after Saint Helena. So this will be the new empire.
Amen.
Named after
Amen.
the capital of the new empire here. Anyways, it's a small city. It's only 30,000. In fact, Montana is a very large state, about the size of California, but with only a million people. So it's very rural, and it just still has that old West kind of. It hasn't been developed. And it's very suitable for Orthodoxy. So we're very blessed to be here. I serve in two parishes in the Serbian diocese under His Grace Bishop Maxim, who is in Alhambra, California, and Los Angeles. And he's the bishop, obviously, of the Western Diocese. And so our main hub, as I call it, is Holy Trinity in Butte, Montana. It's about an hour south of me. That church is 127 years old. Can you believe it? Founded by Saint Sebastian of Jackson and consecrated by Saint Tikhon, the Enlightener of America.
Wow.
So there's a really rich history. Who would have thought, right, out in the middle of nowhere, Montana, that we have this? And so we call it the cathedral. It's been the hub of Orthodoxy, the center. So every Sunday, I serve down there with Father Russell Radojcic, and then we launched a mission parish from there called a satellite mission, like a satellite going around the main parish.
The mothership.
Yes, I call it the mothership, and that's in the Helena area. It's about 15 minutes. 10-15 minutes outside of Helena, tucked in the mountains, and that we launched that about 3.5-4 years ago. And that's really successful. Obviously, it's smaller than the Butte community. The Butte's like 200-300 people. This is about 40 to 60 at best, on a best day. And I usually serve that. That's called Holy Ascension, which was really interesting that Bishop Maxim didn't. He picked the name for that, not knowing that the mountain behind it was Mount Ascension, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
I usually serve there Saturdays, then go down to Butte on Sunday. I also teach philosophy at the local college here, Carroll College.
Yes.
And beyond that, like my ministry and my teaching, it's just great outdoors, skiing, hiking, fishing, stuff like that. So very blessed to be here. We have a monastery now on 1,000 acres. We just got an abbot, Papa Ephraim, who you might know was from St. Anthony's at one time and was commissioned by Elder Ephraim to do the liturgies. And so, and then we have Abbot Methodius from Hillendar Monastery in Mount Athos coming out and on the 23rd, and he's going to be interviewing. We've already got 10 men who are seriously interested in becoming candidates at the monastery here. So glory to God. That's about an hour and 15 minutes south of me, hour of Butte. So wonderful things happening. I'm very blessed.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. And I'll say this. I mean, I'm 40 years old now, and I kind of grew up in central Pennsylvania, but I just have to emphasize how isolated I felt as a child, and not necessarily from a parish, but from a monastery. And the idea that you're an hour plus to a monastery and have these mentors and figures in your life and your community, I should say, to me, it just represents a new phase of Orthodox putting roots into a new land. And I always find it kind of funny, actually. Many people critique Orthodoxy that it seems somewhat ethnic, but I think they misinterpret that. Like our goal is to be relevant and to be local. And we're just sort of like in a new phase, maybe starting another one, as I said, but where people came from another ethnic country, naturally immigrated to the United States and started planting roots, and that grows over time. But I'm glad that we can get Americans connected and making it making that flavor American eventually. That we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but there is a Serbian Orthodox Church, there's a Greek Orthodox Church, and a Russian, et cetera, and they all have a sort of different play on a theme. So I think it's wonderful to hear of the activity. And 1,000 acres, is that true? And this is not the 100-acre wood. This is the 1,000-acre wood.
Yeah, and what blew me away when I first came up here is it's on a river called Philosophy, named by Lewis and Clark in 1808. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to be like on a road called Providence next. And I'm like, this is
yeah.
And so it's absolutely beautiful. And it's in a ranch. I mean, there's nothing around, and it overlooks the Tobacco Root Mountains, and it's on a lake, and it's just fantastic. And, we've been trying to get monks in there. I don't know for how long, 8 years, 10 years or something like that. So it's been kind of frustrating, kind of ups and downs. You think we're going to get something. And then so to see that it's all happening right now. And during the conference, I always take people before the conference starts down there. And we truly believe, the fathers here and the conference organizers, the Orthodox Montanica, that Montana Orthodoxy is on the map and is going to provide a template for the whole world and the country of how Orthodoxy in America is going to look. Like you were talking about, like what does that look like? Because it isn't ethnic, but it has its roots in, like I said, the Serbian and the Greek. We have a Greek parish up here, and the OCA parishes and stuff like that. But I think there's something really important connected to the land too. I hate to say this, cities are artificial.
Sure.
It might be, kind of necessary evil, but that's not how man's supposed to live. And Orthodoxy has a unique connection to the earth, and being Eucharistic with that. And so, but like you said, when it goes in, it doesn't have kind of linguistic or cultural imperialism like Rome did, and forces it on the people and culture. It's like absorbing the land and the culture, eyes and ears open, but always leading with orthodoxy in the kingdom first. What emerges is what the Holy Spirit, when sanctifies the land and people. And it's something unique. I truly believe that's actually happening here in Montana, and people are going to get an idea throughout the United States and go, wow, we can have this in our community too. So very excited.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. You were talking about these young men that are considering being novices or, eventually being monks. I remember a statistic a bishop once told me a long time ago, and he mentioned that Constantinople at one point in its glory days had 10% of its population as monks. And, I've come across different statistics, and I find this interesting, but there's so many men checking out of society right now for various reasons, whether it's because there's a feminization of our culture, the job market is difficult, economics, etc. And of course, I think there's plenty of distractions to sort of, unfortunately lead people into something very unproductive and non-spiritual to kind of fill that void. But, isn't it interesting that society historically had a place for monks that of such a high percentage? It's almost as if, there really is a destined few, like a called few that are supposed to take this role. And if you don't have a church and a faith that recognizes that, then you end up just watching more porn and playing more video games. And so it's such a weird thing that Orthodoxy, as you said, as foreign as it is to America, really actually ends up filling a massive gap in this sort of current American state of mind, specifically for men. And I'm sure, we could create a certain similar narrative, parallel narrative for women too. But, it's wonderful that I'm hearing that there's something that might be going on in Montana that might be bringing, who knows, that 10% of the human population who naturally are called to something like that, but have never been able to put their finger on what that could be.
I've thought about this too. I was talking with my godfather, who's the co-founder and co-runs the St. Patitsas Brotherhood with Father Hans. And of course, we talk about young men and the various issues. And I was speaking with him recently because a lot of the young guys, they're extremely frustrated about the dating world. It's not, I'm a Gen Xer. And also I wasn't Orthodox at the time, so that's a bit different. But obviously dating in the late 90s and early 2000s and stuff like that, the dating world was totally different. The world was totally different.
Yes.
And these young guys are really frustrated, trying to find a wife, and there's nothing out there, and they're trying to explain. Now, part of this is, well, because everybody's terminally online. Like when I was growing up, we weren't.
Terminally.
Out, and I was actually socially engaging with people on a regular basis. So that's one issue too. And anyways, I got this thought that, well, what if God's calling up a whole new group of young men to become monastics? And I don't think these young men have thought about that. They feel an extreme pressure to get married right away. Now, the problem is these young men, like the Z generation, is really good at having their eyes open and seeing that everything was a scam. It's a facade. All the institutions that our parents believed in are fake and gray, and that's good. But the problem is they're always pointing their finger at the blame is this. The blame is the dating. It's the women. It's the this.
A victim mentality, it
doesn't
get anywhere.
Mentality, and they're never doing any work. The problem is that young men are not men. There's an and no fault of their own. There's an infantilization that was put on them by culture to keep them permanently infantile. I mean, for crying out loud, I said, you guys are playing with dollies. You have anime. You're playing video games all the time. You're addicted to porn. You're in a spiritually and mentally, infantile state. And so you're not ready. You're not a man. You're not ready to, and it's effeminized too. You talked about that too. We have a culture pushing, the effeminization of men. It's like, you're not ready to be married. You're not a man. We need to work on that. St. Patitsas Brotherhood, part of that, is dealing with that. So they feel an enormous pressure to, I got to get married right away and have children. It's like, but you have to offer the woman. So you can't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to do. And so the other option too
There's a lot of work to do. Yes.
Maybe you should consider the other calling. Maybe you should find your manhood and become a man and become a monk. With all we've talked about, and it's great. Families are great. Marriage life is great. That's one calling. That's one avenue. So I was thinking, well, maybe these issues maybe God will use this.
Mm-hmm.
That it is hard to find a good woman to marry in this day and age. Well, maybe we're going to have more monks. Like, that's something to consider.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I actually had this conversation with Buck Johnson a few months ago. I work in an ER and I work with a lot of nurses. I mean, in some ways, it's like it's almost like a lion pride. You got like all these nurses who typically are female. I will mention actually male nurses are extraordinary. Like every male nurse I've ever met is really solid for whatever that means. But usually it's a very female dominated role. And there's a certain interaction there. But, we get to talking sometimes when there's a slow moment. And one of the things that was being brought up was this idea of roles for men and for women. And it was very clear what men's role was and like what they expected. And the example of provider and protector, we put out this quick story. I'd love to hear your feedback on it. But essentially it goes like this. A man takes out a woman to a restaurant and he's going to pay for the meal, of course. But someone comes up to their table who's this big drunk, ugly guy, and he starts harassing them. And the scenario goes something like this. That ugly, big fat guy starts harassing them and gets physical. And the guy, the potential boyfriend on the date, bolts. He runs. He just leaves her behind. And so I ask all the nurses in the ER, hey, when you go meet that guy again the next day, are you going to continue to date him? And they were all just like, no way. Obviously, like he didn't protect, that was a major role. It's a big party foul. So I said 100%, everyone in the room agreed. That's a party foul enough that everyone just inherently knows that was a fail.
Mm-hmm.
Then I told the ladies, I said, please create for me a similar story where that if you didn't do X, Y, and Z, the at least role, he could get up and walk away and say that's never going to work out. They couldn't create a single story. Wow. And I just feel like what happened with feminism is that women did such a phenomenal job of absolving themselves of every role, every duty, every, job description, that they eventually were able to declare themselves having no role. And if you have no role and no function, you really have no value and you have no identity. So like, why are we wasting our time? Now, again, I'm talking broadly, but it's just strange to me. I live in America and we're so intelligent and so educated, yet we've lost such fundamental roles as if that was like liberating. And instead, it just leaves everyone feeling very empty and confused.
Well, that's the demonic trap. I mean, feminism itself is championed on women's right and freedom, pro-women. If you go to the philosophical roots of it with Simone de Beauvoir and various other kind of early philosophical thinkers, they hated femininity. They hated the idea of woman. So so notice the trick in champion the woman, it's actually anti-woman. And
yes,
champion,
yeah,
and it's not just about women. For all of us, shouldn't we be free, my freedoms and all this stuff? And it's slavery. It doesn't. That's the demonic trap and trick, is that in the name of liberation and freedom and good, you're sold the opposite. You're sold slavery, bad. So we're in a place that it's not free, it's not liberating, it's enslavement. And there's no the roles. For example, what is it to be a woman? So apart from the whole kind of like the trans issue and stuff where that question came up, you just brought up an excellent illustration. To define something is to have boundaries. That's literally what it means to define borders.
Yes.
And those have been blurred and absolved.
Yes.
So a woman doesn't even know what it is to be a woman. She doesn't know her role, which is perfectly executed in that kind of question. What is it to be? What are my duties? Who am I? And I've talked about that before, that's an excommunication. Like we have so if we see who and what we are liturgically, look at all the different roles going on in the liturgy. You have the bishop, the priest, the deacon, right? You have the hierarchy, right? And they're standing in is, the bishop is Christ, stands as he's where, as St. Ignatius of Antioch says, the church is where the bishop is. The priest will stand in place of the bishop, and the deacon, also being part of the clergy, and that's separated. There's a boundary, right, of the iconostasis.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the role of the priest's wife, who is caring for, like a mother would, the family, right? So that the priest can do his job. So they're both working synergistically. You have the choir, right? You have the altar. So you have all these clearly defined roles,
Yes.
all equal in dignity, right? But clearly distinct. So we find our role in who we are liturgically. So, and it's communal, it's Trinitarian. So it's not an isolated individual. So what we have in these examples that you brought up is you're pulled out of the liturgy. What does it mean to be pulled out of communion? It's excommunication. And if we find our identity in communion, then we lose ourselves. We unravel. This is why depression, this is why, violence, everything is that somebody is unraveling. They're losing themselves.
Yeah. I love this.
Yeah.
I love these terms you're using, because I can kind of see it as you're describing it. This, if defining your identity is a boundary, and we're talking now about this excommunication, when you get rid of that, you're literally putting yourself in exile. And
Yes.
What is exile? It's like going beyond the boundary. And there in that land, you have no purpose and no role,
man's
no
man.
relationship. Yeah. And yes. And so it is very very intentional description. I really like it. It brings it to life. And so it really is interesting that men then would find maybe some type of respite and role in a monastic setting. And again, it's amazing that Orthodoxy is providing that. I also think, though, too, for those people that are married, etc., and I'm sure we agree here as well, it's obvious, but men that are not going to become monastics benefit from going to a monastery. We
Absolutely.
having that connection and that community support is just huge. In fact, I think the grand ironies, maybe other than like places like Mount Athos, but the grand ironies of many monasteries that were started ended up creating, communities around them, just because everyone was so drawn to it. So, you can just sort of see the natural, everyone's going towards the light. That's just sort of a historical phenomenon, but it shows that there's something very normal and natural about that. So why wouldn't that occur?
We've been kind of lacking that in the United States. I mean, how many monasteries, like the closest monastery to us is probably in Washington State, Glendale, and then you have Merciful Savior, Abbot Trefon's monastery. Is there might be a monastery in Colorado, and then you have Arizona. That's quite far. I mean, things are kind of spread out. California is blessed to have 3 or 4 monasteries, but California is a huge state. That's spread out quite far. You have monasteries, a few monasteries on the East Coast. That's it. So to get a new monastery in the Rockies, that's going to become important. And I don't think you're going to see flourishing of orthodoxy, like you said, without monasteries. The parish life and the monastic life are symbiotic. They're distinct. It's sort of like the symphonia of Byzantine state and the church, right? 2 distinct spheres overlapping, and they're symbiotic, right? They're synergistic, and they're a symphony together. And I think the same thing with monasteries. They're distinct, and what that means is you don't bring the monastic life into the parish life, right? There's been disasters when this happens, trying to apply the kind of rules and the lifestyle of the
Right.
monastic life, and
Right.
you do likewise. You do not bring parish life into the monastery. There's strict
Hmm.
rules. As you know, like if you've ever been to St. Anthony's Monastery, in most men's monastery, women are not allowed to talk to the monks. They,
Hmm.
they don't want to be distracted. So there's very strict rules, but we're still connected, right? You can still go to the monastery and benefit, and we need each other.
I think again, as a physician and you as a clergyman, what's so unique about many of the things that we see is we often see people unmasked. And some ways, as clergy interact with people over time and they see patterns and they see human nature, I kind of see them in their toughest moments in the ER, and people can really let loose. But I think what we've also lost touch with in the 21st century is we've become so successfully civilized, and our temperature is set at 74 degrees no matter how much snow is falling or no matter how hot it is outside, and the food always arrives, and the pressure of the water is always regular. Like we really lose touch with raw reality. And if you're not a clergyman and you're not working, in an ER or in some other, intense role, you can just really lose touch. And it's funny you bring up this point about, oh, that's pretty harsh. Women can't even talk to the monks. But what I think is so awesome about monasteries is again, when you go there, they just unapologetically admit to their own human nature and frailty. Like everyone just,
Yeah.
like it's like, imagine a person who doesn't know anything about Orthodoxy or maybe even about Christianity in a secular American world, hearing this idea that the monks aren't allowed to talk to women. Well, they might initially assume it's because of all of this power differential or something. But really what that American is admitting is that they don't even understand basic human nature.
Yeah.
And then what does that lead to? I don't even understand what a woman is, and I don't understand what debt is, and I don't understand what if I should ever get married or even have children or reproduce. Like I'm pretty sure amoebas have been figuring out reproduction forever, and we're at the height of human civilization, and we're wondering if we should have children. Like it blows my mind. The next thing they'll be saying is we don't need water or we don't need air, and I think one of the reasons that there's been such tremendous discussion as of late with all this transgendered stuff is that people finally were able to say, like, there is just something so basic here we're not agreeing on. I don't know if 2 + 2 = 4 anymore, and I don't know if I want a person who doesn't think 2 + 2 = 4 organizing how to engineer a plane or how to organize my society. Like if you can't get the A, B, and C right, I don't trust anything else that's coming out from that source. So, monasteries bring us back to center.
Yeah, and this is a huge. You'll know this in your area work too. Bioethics. I mean, you have a board at your hospital making biomedical decisions, right? On all these kinds of questions of what it means to be a human being, what you can and can't do.
Yes.
What technologies, for example, and in bioethics we call it the devil's bargain, is when we advance biomedical like technologies, like, oh, look what this could do. I mean, we'll have this kind of Neuralink chip that can basically, they're working right now that it can use AI. It's like an MRI brain scan, and they can use the AI to basically map onto what exact thoughts the person's having. In other words, it's reading your mind in kind of an indirect way. And isn't that great? I mean, we can now help nonverbal autists. So at front, you see the immediate benefits, not realizing that tied up in the bargain is the devil's bargain that, like, uh-oh.
Yes.
What else are we going to... Now, who makes these decisions? Well, you have a board at your hospital, people who are bioethicists that do not share the same values as...
Right.
And can we have a Christian, can we have a universal democratic bioethics? No, absolutely not.
Right.
And you probably see this in, in the medical work and the hospital all the time, is that people give radically different answers about what it means to have advancement in medicine, health, and these various things based on radically different presuppositions. And it's scary.
Well, I mean, the best example of that gone wrong at scale was COVID. I mean, I always said this from the moment it was even discussed. I'm like, guys, we're not talking about science or medicine right now. We have an ethical decision to make. And it's something like, do we shut down the world? I mean, I'm just putting in one perspective, but do we shut down the world to keep 25% of people over the age of 70 that have lots of risk factors from dying from a virus? Like, should we shut down schools and keep people from learning and, feeding themselves? And I mean, all the second, third, fourth order effects, no one had a clue. But again, it wasn't about like, oh, is this capsid, going to be penetrable and carried by air at 6 feet? Like, we're completely missing the point. The real issue was, how do we manage society through a tough moment where we don't know the future? And I feel like all the wrong people, as you mentioned, this board of ethics, in this case, it was a few despotic politicians, I guess, who had never taken care of a patient in their life, or worse yet, didn't have a family or didn't have kids, or were so disconnected from reality. It was such a strange phenomenon, and you could just kind of see this unfolding. But I think what we should have had were people who understood ethics. To there should have been professors coming together and religious leaders. And I mean,
there were some, and I work with I've done conference with Dr. Ryan Nash. He's a philosophy professor and then MD as well. And he's done work at Johns Hopkins, and I believe he's teaching at Ohio. And he's on a lot of these boards. And him and Dr. Ananias is another person I've worked with that's a medical doctor, and they just shut him down. Like, they just were like, we don't actually. So they were actually on the boards, and they were like, hey, look, the masks don't work, or this isn't good to roll out something that hasn't gone through clinical trials, and that's a new technology, etc. They didn't care. They just I talked to them, they just shut them down. So it's interesting, because yesterday's philosophy class, we actually talked about the corruption that happens and why in medicine, and this probably will kind of segue into a lot of stuff that you want to talk about. But I'm like, how does it work? Like, how are medicines, prescribed and stuff? And so we wrote up a bunch of all the different institutions that are involved, right? So you have doctors, you have pharmaceutical reps, you have pharmacies, you have the funding and foundations that fund the pharmaceutical industries. You have the FDA, correct? You have government law, and the government agencies, like the health director and all this different stuff. Then you have the research hospitals. You have the research journals, medical journals. And I just kind of let the students kind of connect the dots. Okay, what does this group do, and how do they play a role? And it became really obvious to them, the kind of cronyism. I'm like, isn't that weird that some of these people that are working in these companies and pharmaceutical are on the boards and editorial boards for journals and medical journals?
Sure.
And this kind of easily conflict of interest that produces, and what we see is it's the money. They have a product that they want to sell, and we saw this early on in psychiatry. They were literally creating medicine, creating diseases to fit a product that they were It's like disease doesn't even exist. Like, that's crazy. And then, it's very easy. If you have if you're a foundation, you pay for an endowment and a chair in a research university, you can shape the data. And well, you know what, this isn't really going to look good. And also with the publications too, the peer-reviewed medical journals, you can be like, well, this kind of goes against kind of our position, so we'll be less favorable to publish that, and more favorable one that promotes our product. And this happened with COVID. This happened with a lot of things in medicine. So we really, and you probably know this, we have a society that's polypharmacy. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. It's no longer about healing anymore. It's just everybody's on. I mean, talk about statins. What a crazy drug. Like, I can't believe.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll maybe a few things to riff on. Maybe another perspective too is I notice more and more of CEOs of gigantic hospital systems, which again, it's the age of healthcare systems that buy out local hospitals or force them to shut down one way or another. But the CEO is an accountant. Like, the CEO has, again, never taken care of a patient, has never been at bedside. And there's such a disconnect between the content creators, even if you give them benefit of the doubt, and those that provide care, and then the people that manage all of that. And I've been in a number of leadership positions over my career where, I thought we were here to solve a problem, and it wasn't that. We were here to drink the Kool-Aid, and this policy is coming from on high, and whoever's on high is like, you think it's the Wizard of Oz or something. It's like this accountant, it's so bizarre. And so I think that really has, like, all of this kind of comes with the territory of what you're describing, and it's such a tsunami of disaster. But yes, I mean, there's a lot of abuse there, and there's a lot of misalignment, and there's a lot of leadership, and we've funded people to be, we give a lot of people money who are charismatic and who are entrepreneurial, but they're in positions now where we're not just creating sandwiches in efficiency. In the case of healthcare, it gets real. And so, again, going back to this idea of like the raw and the sober, and not forgetting that, this isn't all just numbers and policies. This is like really kind of trickling down to affecting lives. In the case of COVID, an entire world. So it's very strange. But talking about that idea of hospitals and clergy and physicians, have you had many memories or that come to mind of where you went to bedside at the hospital for those that were dying or those that were in tragedy? And how did you help that patient and maybe even that physician kind of explore that ethical decision and make the right one, or the best one they could make anyway?
I've never worked with physicians per se. Like, I've done conference with bioethics professors, and they're specifically in that role. I have dealt with, I've been at bedsides in hospice, just, providing, and that's difficult too, especially if somebody's not Orthodox. You're trying to prepare them for death.
Yes.
But you're not proselytizing, you know what I mean? You're meeting them where they're at, and you're trying to kind of give a general kind of Orthodox framework and kind of comfort them. What's really interesting too is that, and that's a really interesting role. I mean, it's different than, dealing with somebody who's actually Orthodox, but let me show you like something. It's a stark contrast between the Orthodox and kind of a secular mindset. You're on your deathbed. Most people want to be doped out of their minds. They're in pain. And they're not there. And they're going to go into their last hours, the last work that they have in their life. They're going to be anesthetized, basically. And it's interesting in Orthodoxy that a lot of Orthodox will refuse any pain medication. That's their last cross and last struggle to do well as they go into the next life. And I find that really interesting. And, we just have, speaking about these two kind of different worldviews in terms of like pain management and end of life care and stuff like that, totally radically different. We have pain management. It's like everybody has a right not to be in pain.
Right. It was called the fifth vital sign for a while in medicine. It was like, what's your pain scale, and what are we going to do about that? It also led obviously to a huge opiate crisis in America.
Yeah, I told my class, I'm like, that pain scale was created by Purdue Pharmacy and the Sackler family to basically legitimize giving Oxycontin to, oh yeah, my pain scale's on a 9. Okay, well, here you go. Anyways, what's interesting is that I bought into that. My wife was given a total and permanent disability. She was basically bedridden for 10 years of our marriage. We're going on 18 years in December.
Oh.
And so I experienced this. I mean, they had her on Oxycontin, extended release. Oh, guess what? You have a new thing called breakthrough pain. That's why you need Oxycontin instant release. Totally made up, dude. Like breakthrough pain. And they had her on fentanyl patches. They had her on MS Cotton. They had her on SSRIs. They had her on benzodiazepines, clonazepam, Ritalin to boost her.
This is strong.
A cocktail for death. I mean, I couldn't believe. And so, but I bought into it then. I was like, everybody has a right not to be. And she was in excruciating pain.
Right.
So I didn't know. I was just like, I trusted the medical community that, I guess they're right. It was killing her. And you were having these rebound effects too. The opiates were making you, over time, make you more sensitive to pain. So you take more opiates, right?
Sure. It is a vicious cycle. Absolutely.
Eventually, we kind of woke up and we used diet. And we eventually, my wife and I worked to get her off all the medications. And she's totally fine. Isn't that amazing?
Crazy.
But now, retrospect and being Orthodox too, that, okay, you have a right not to be in pain. You have a right to do whatever you want. That doesn't mean it's good. And
to
embrace, you're not purposely seeking out, you're not masochistic or anything like that. And like, I'm going to, purposely seek out pain. But when you're given pain, the Orthodox thinks about it very differently. I'm going to struggle, and I'm going to struggle well through it. It's an opportunity for me to gain virtue. You cannot gain virtue, and that is salvation for us, to acquire the spiritual virtues. You cannot acquire virtue because it's not a natural gift. It's something that has to be worked on. And you can't acquire it without pain and struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, even in sports, right? I mean, you think about it, like, there's no easy way to become an athlete.
Sure.
You have to work hard at what you're doing and get stronger. And there's a virtue in that. But the secular world doesn't see that. I mean, maybe they understand it in sports. Well, they don't understand it in anything else in life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, sports, right? I mean, we get to watch others work hard, and that's very entertaining.
Live vicariously through. If I was him, wow,
it is vicariously is the right word. There's so much to unpack there. I mean, I'll just throw this out as well. I used to tell men that I would speak to and say, hey, if you want to see what a man does in the face of pain or struggle, you just need to go find your nearest 12-year-old Amish boy who's just been run over by a tractor, has 20 broken bones, a collapsed lung. And when I go to bedside and say, can I get you something for pain? He's like, I'm fine. And I'm telling you, it is so cultural, but cultural probably is too superficial to say. It's like there's something deep within their paradigm that is passed down, that these Caucasian people who live in America and eat from the soil of America, like there's nothing special about what their genetic profile is. Like they just have a different way of seeing the world, and it literally can create a sense of peace in a very difficult moment of tragedy. Meanwhile, my average American that comes into the ER is freaking out that he has to have an IV placed. Like, and again, I'm not saying they can't like wince when they have the needle. There's nothing wrong with that, but this is not just that. This at times is just over the top.
And I should qualify too for the audience. Having pain medication and pain relief is not a sin.
Sure.
So in ethics, this is what we would call supererogation. Not to take it and struggle hard through that for the sake of virtue is supererogation. It's going above and beyond the call of duty. So it's not a sin to want pain relief or something. Like, it's totally understandable, right? But you see, when somebody does choose to be like, no, I'm going to struggle through this. The Finnish people have a term called sisu. This is a really interesting concept because it's so not American. Sisu is purposely and intentfully taking on unnecessary struggle for the sake of virtue to become stronger. So, for example, let's say you're going to your winter cabin.
Yeah.
And you could drive up, through the road, or you could park a mile away and hike in through the snow. They'll do that. They'll take the mile, the hard work. Why? Because it builds virtue and strength. Right. So we're always taking the easy way. And I know that Father Russell, who I served with, during the fast, it's not just about abstaining from food, but changing your mindset, reorientating, right, to gain virtue. It's your sisu. And he'll even encourage, when you're coming up to the red light, what do we always do? We switch lanes into the shorter lane. At the marketplace, you always find the shorter line. He said, during the fast, why don't you try this? Don't switch. Take the longer one. Wait. That's your sisu. And why? It's not because you're degrading the body and, the body and these things are evil or something like that, and you're depriving it. You're teaching yourself virtue and patience and these different things. And anyways.
Yeah, no, this is huge. I mean, maybe to use Orthodox terminology, I mean, that's what asceticism is.
Yes.
And what's so funny, and I've written a book on fasting, and I explore these topics all the time, especially this like conundrum of what is the difference between asceticism and masochism?
Yeah.
And what you said is exactly right, which is that there's something about asceticism that makes the body actually, usually, at least with fasting, healthier, the mind clearer, brings a person peace, and makes them stronger at the end point. I mean, you could say, well, what's the point of an athlete training? I mean, that's like they get better. They're not masochists. Now I would say, and maybe I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but I know there's a lot of Latin Rite, Western like there is a masochism literally in a Latin tradition, which I do not think is a blessed pathway. It steps over the line. And so when you're showing me your hands and scars,
mortification, that's what it's called in the Latin.
Yeah. I don't think that is a blessed path. That is masochism, and that is not asceticism. And I'll say this: I've never met an anorexic who was fasting for God. It is always an internal, distorted, vain pursuit, and it's like so interesting, right? Like you have an ascetic who fasts in a certain spirit, so subtly different, that gives him what I've shown. Very long life, oddly enough. It's such a strange irony. And you have this person who, in a sense, is kind of doing the same thing for all the wrong reasons, and they're dead by 25, you know? And it's what a marked example of how the spirit of what you do can make a huge difference. So yeah, I mean, what an interesting idea. Park that car far away. But yes, there is something there. This other thing about exploring the virtues through struggle. I mean, if I could just speak from a physician standpoint, if you don't know where your pain is, I, as your doctor, have no idea where to hone in on. So, like, there really is something to that where you mentioned this example. We need struggle and pain to explore and journey to gain the virtues. Well, even as a physician looking at the body, I need your pain to help me figure out where to go so we can solve this problem. Interesting for your wife, when she allowed that pain to come back, she could hone in on diet and figure out there was something internal there that she could change. But if she had masked that, she never would have learned. She never would have progressed. And so, yeah, I mean, by all means, we don't want people with broken bones. We already know what's wrong then, right? The bone is broken. Let's put it back in order. But if I dope you up so much, and whether that's a physical medication or that's something more spiritual and more psychological, if we don't have those pain points, we're not going to solve anything.
No. And I remember too early, there was a couple doctors that would say put kind of seeds of truth, kernels of truth in. But I remember there was one doctor that was going off on SSRIs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying it masks it, it clouds, it never allows you to go in and basically fix things.
Yeah.
It kind of, and she'd use the term a cloud. I'm like, it kind of is really like a cloud. And the same with like pain medications too. You never really get to the underlying kind of cause of that because it's just kind of masking and clouding it up. And a lot of these things are inflammatory. That's what we learned is, and just how the whole nervous system works and stuff like that.
Well,
we can hone in on that and be like, now we can address that.
Yes. There's this book, I think, written by a Polish man called The Witcher, and they made a TV show out of it. It's pretty risque, but the point I bring it up is the whole concept of the film is men sin, they refuse to solve the problem, and monsters arise from that. And I feel like it's this Polish man who is a Catholic, I'm sure, who wrote this book, really hones in on a brilliant point, which is that through our sins and weaknesses and frailties, we have these problems, but when you don't address them, other second, third, fourth order effects emerge, and everything goes toxic from that. I mean, I can just tell you an example. Yesterday, we had this unfortunate case. Anyway, it was just very obvious this was a social disaster among parents and their children. And because of this chaos, it was such a time sink to sort out the subtleties of this problem. Like, everyone else in the department was suffering as a result. They weren't getting their medicines as fast. They weren't getting their workup done. Everyone was kind of in hyper mode as coming out of this room trying to solve an issue. And you can just see, like, the butterfly effect is an understatement, and we think of the butterfly effect as so random, but the reality is that a lot of these effects start with a toxic perspective, and we need to own that to solve anything.
Yeah. And so, going into what Orthodox asceticism and fasting is really the kind of opposite of that. So we have all these complex problems and sins in multiple layers. Like, one sin leads to another sin, one problem leads to what we don't want to do, and our culture does, is we dope ourselves. And I don't mean necessarily with medications, but with comforts. We eat certain food. We just give ourselves what we want when we want it. What's the McDonald's? Don't they have a phrase? Or Burger King, we do it your way. And like the whole, like, it's all whatever you want.
Right.
Well, what that does is it keeps you in a kind of mass clouded state, like we were talking about, like what medications would do. and we never address our problems. We think we're fine when we're not, because we're putting comforts in. And so part of what fast and asceticism is to remove those, so we can see where the problems lie and we can actually start doing the work. And that's exactly when you don't. And I told, Father, I've had many confessions that are similar, because he says, well, what do you want to be? What's the vision that you want as a human being? I'm like, I'll tell you exactly what I don't want to be. And then in light of that, what I want to be, I don't want to be known as the person that's like, oh, he's a really good guy when everything goes his way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I don't want to be. And I have that in me. I want to be the person that's like, man, look, they tortured him. Whatever terrible things, he lost everything. And he was so much joy. Nothing could touch him. I'm like, that's what I want. And that's a saint.
Sure.
That's where, and he says, okay, now you have the vision. Don't let anything distract you from that, because every sin is a distraction from that. And so I can't get there if I don't practice asceticism and fasting, because when I remove my comforts, my wants, I, me, minds, I see things that have been hidden down.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, there it is. There's a demon right there that needs to be worked on. And so notice the difference between, as you mentioned, the kind of Latin notion, mortification, self-flagellation, and all this stuff. I think that actually comes from St. Augustine, who had Manichaean influences, that even when he left that cult, that Gnostic sect, he still had a lot of that baggage, as we all do. We bring baggage in. But Manichaeanism believed that matter in the body was evil. Right. So it punished it. It mortified it. Like,
and kind of Gnosticism.
It's a Gnosticism. And that is definitely in the Roman Catholic asceticism, whether they realize it or not, is they don't have the mindset. We're not trying to kill the body. Like Father Russell says, fast, don't make yourself sick doing it, because that's not the purpose. To, like you brought up, the anorexic, they're fasting and making themselves sick and killing themselves.
Right.
We're not doing that. We're doing that to basically uncover and see what we actually need to work on, and that it's a struggle so that we can acquire virtue. And the second thing too, I'd add, and this is a real problem for Orthodox, this statutory legalism, that fasting is these rules that please God or something. And you get a little bit of that in Roman Catholicism too, because in terms of merits, that the benefit of asceticism fasting is just, legalism and merits. And I had a student was Orthodox. This was like a year or two ago, and we talked about diet. And my wife and I went on the carnivore diet for 3 years, healing a lot of stuff. We're no longer on the carnivore diet, but we had the blessing of our priest, and we were working with, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The difference between the anorexic and the person fasting is one decides by themselves what to do. They're fasting. Sure. In Orthodox, you always have to, we have a general template. You do not create your own prayer rule, or fasting. That's worked out with your priest. So you're not in your own mind. That's the problem anyways, making your own decisions, which you see the disastrous effects. You have a physician of souls guiding you in and through that, tailoring, much like you would to somebody, their different, interactions and medical history and stuff like that to make it work. Now, the student asked, well, wait a minute, you were on carnivore for 3 years. How does that work in Orthodoxy? And they were new to Orthodoxy. And I used sarcasm to illustrate the point. I said, well, let me just explain to you, class. who God is. God loves bootlickers, and he just loves rule followers. The more rules that you can add up, the better. And they all laughed. I'm like, you see how ridiculous that is? God is not pleased by adding up rules and merits, following the rules and stuff like this. Is a total wrong view of like what fasting is. Anyways,
Yeah, I mean, it's true, and I think again, the point is something like the spirit that guides you forward in an undertaking will allow you to have the wisdom to know when this something is beneficial or not, or needs to be tweaked, and at the same time we have an Orthodox church that allows us to have the support and the resources
yes,
to know that we're not just conflating things in our own minds and self-serving our own ends. So,
exactly. Yeah.
and so, maybe just one thing briefly about fasting, because I think it's quite important. And the reason I like to double click on this is just as a doc, I just always like to emphasize that the stakes of fasting are so much higher than just like you said, a merit system or God looking at rules. I mean, there's a few perspectives of it, but I would highlight two things. One is that truly when you are fasting, your body is healing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the way monks fast in Athos, where not only are they fasting from certain foods, but they only eat certain portions of the day, that is intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
And when any mammal intermittent fast, they live 40% longer and they avoid 90% of disease. So, to me, it's the most meek Christian thing in the world that God would create I mean, he created it. I mean, this is his science. This is his creation. But there is a method so simple that can alleviate so much suffering. And at the same time, you're alleviating the suffering, but you are taking on a challenge, which is difficult. So you're not getting away from the suffering per se. You're just changing your tragedy into challenge. And load me up. I'll take challenges all day. I want to go to sleep exhausted. I don't want any tragedies in my day. Yeah. And then when the tragedies come, I'll be prepared. But the second part too is that, and again, it deserves a conversation, but food and our digestion and our enteric nervous system is such a visceral aspect of what it means to be human that you cannot fake it. Like, actually, the same pathways that we activate with drug use are the same ones for food. Like, all of these things are dopamine and serotonin and, all these different catecholamines. The point is that when you fast, you are changing your spirit. Like, it connects those worlds. When I fast and I can't grab the cupcake as a 7-year-old, I am not just denying a cupcake. I am learning self-restraint and discipline and delayed gratification. And I'm not learning it. I'm feeling it. Yeah. I'm feeling it. And I think that is the key link, is that fasting makes
incarnational.
Yeah. Wow. Exactly. And I think this is something we don't emphasize enough. We're like, oh, well, it's not about the fasting. It's not about this. It isn't. But there is this visceral connection that allows us to feel what we're supposed to learn. And when you're a 7-year-old or your IQ is 50 or whatever, you're 7 feet tall or 4 feet tall, it doesn't matter. God has this universal thing through our body that allows us to reach the spirit. And as you mentioned, this incarnation of the virtue through something kind of physical, it's kind of wild. Yeah. But yes, it's and fasting, of course, obviously can be in different forms. I mean, some people fast from different food items, and if you do it right with the instruction of other people, you can get something akin to, let's say, a vegan diet with that level of restriction through a ketogenic diet, through a carnivore diet. And if you're that person blessed or cursed with a certain profile and you're trying to work through something, there's a fast for you that you and your spiritual father can create.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing too is that food is so important, but again, it's not about because certain foods are evil and that's why we're abstaining. Like, it's exactly what you said is, well, there is there's definitely a biological and spirit. We don't separate those two spheres. The psychic, and I don't mean weird, but the mind, right?
Yes, yeah.
The spiritual and the physical. So foods are important, and what we learn through that, when we abstain from certain things, but also other modes of fasting too that people don't think about, because they're just like, well, fasting is just about abstaining from food. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
Think about, we work on, and our priest is really big about this, digital fasting, because just as foods are working with dopamine, right, and serotonin, well, guess what our digital devices produce?
Right.
Dopamine hits. And we are getting high basically on dopamine.
Yes.
And the tragic effect of that is somebody who is addicted to, we might all be at different levels addicted to digital usage, is, I've seen young people so addicted to digital devices and video games that when I brought them out into nature, they don't experience any beauty
It's
at all,
withdrawal. It
because
literally is withdrawal.
it's a
Yeah.
withdrawal, because they're used to these crack hits of dopamine
Yes.
at this level. So everything else that doesn't hit that level is a withdrawal. They're actually, and I see it in their face, they're depressed. They're the exact same signs of withdrawals from drugs. And so it's really important, I think, to try to work in the fast as a digital fast as well. We're removing that as well, and that's going to be healthy for us as well. So it's not just food; it's a lot of things.
No, you're right, and it's funny. I mean, again, imagine Christ, God, speaking to people across all ages, civilizations, and parts of the world. And of course, we have a digital age now, but like this is why food was chosen, because
Yeah.
if I can learn it through food, I can apply that in anything. And I don't know what the next industry is going to be. It could be, the AI of something other industry, but I'm still going to be human with these virtues and vices to attain and struggle with. And so, if I can teach a 10-year-old the virtues through fasting, I can have that person grow up and be in an industry where there might be something that also requires self-restraint and delayed gratification and patience, et cetera, et cetera. They've already felt that. They've already understood what that feels and looks like. And I think it's just such an ingenious thing. I mean, maybe the only other thing that might be more core than the food we eat is maybe when we breathe. But of course, there also is a level of meditation with the Jesus prayer, et cetera, where you're supposed to change your breaths and isn't it interesting that there's something that we bring in that's very physical into our spiritual practice? Why is that? And it's because we recognize we're in a body, and we have to work through those pathways, you could call that, or through the senses to reach the soul. It's a very interesting interplay.
And I've thought about this too, with fasting outside of Orthodoxy. Like Protestants, certain Protestants would be like, "Oh, I'm doing a fast," and something always rubbed me the wrong way when I would say. And I think the reason why is that, first of all, it bore no fruits. Like, it didn't do anything. And I think why is that, look how different it is in Orthodoxy. In the Protestant, you decide to do it.
Right.
There's no sacerdotal order, the priesthood, in which there's a physician of soul, body, and mind that's working with you within a community in which we're like, okay, we're all at this time going to do it together. Why? Because we're Trinitarian, we're a community. And there's a hierarchy within that community, a real distinction. In Protestant, you don't have that. So even if you have a group, and because I remember some Protestants like, well, a lot of us do it together. It's just not just me. It's like, Yeah, but it's still you deciding
Mhm.
without a head, right? And a physician guiding you on that. And you can just see the fruits of it. It's like, but it doesn't do anything in Protestantism. Like, I don't see any benefits. The whole concept, as we just explored right now, what asceticism fast is totally different in Orthodoxy than anywhere else.
Mhm.
And so, just like the anorexia, like deciding to do something on your own,
Mhm.
in which you don't have, you're all by yourself making the decisions, which we are the problem, isn't going to fix the problem. And the same thing in Protestant, like just because you're deciding to fast and do these things doesn't mean you have the right kind of mindset behind that, and then it's going to actually work and do what. And I mean, it's parasitic, right? Protestantism takes pieces of the truth and orthodoxy outside of the whole, and
Right.
that's what every heresy is.
Hmm.
It's taking a piece of the truth, whether it's the Bible, whether it's anything else, and it's taking it out of the kataholos, in Greek as the Catholicity, the whole,
Mhm.
according to the whole, pertaining to the whole, and it's making it as if it were the whole. And guess what? It breaks. It doesn't work.
Hmm.
And I see that, but just like demons, they can't create. Evil can't create. It's only parasitic. It's vampiric, right? It has to have its reality that's not really real. It's illusory by sucking off the life by being a parasite, because it can't create. So every heresy, every sin is that way. And it's an illusion too. It's a magic trick, because nobody's going to fall if you just make something up. If you just present something as totally wrong and false in every way, nobody's going to go for it, right? You have to take it part of the truth, present it as the whole, right? And but I mean, think about this is even the temptation of the serpent, the devil, and the temptation to Adam and Eve. He takes a piece of the truth, and but there's something false in there. He takes it out of the whole, and he presents it in its own way. So he even has to be parasitic. And what does he say? If you eat this, you'll become like God. Well, the whole purpose is to become like God.
Mhm.
So there's part of it that's right. But what does he do? In your own way. Let's do it instead of God's way. Let's make you become God on your own terms. And isn't, everything kind of like that? Every sin is a perversion of the truth. But it's always, instead of doing it God's way or the Orthodox way, let's do it my way. And
Maybe a really dramatic example of what you're saying. I don't know if you've seen this documentary called Christspiracy, but it's entertaining. It's laughable, but essentially, Christspiracy is a documentary made by some Protestants about how God did not come to save the world; He came to save animals. So when God goes into the temple, which is true, and He throws over the tables and releases the animals and the pigeons, He was actually trying to get rid of sacrifice in this old Israeli Jewish way of doing things, not for anything more than just to get rid of killing of animals. So it's this incredibly distorted realignment of prioritization. And what's so funny about it is they make this claim that God came down to show us that we're not supposed to eat animals and kill animals and murder animals, as if that was the reason He came down to earth.
Yeah.
What's so funny is they go on to interview some non-Christian groups out in the East. I guess there are certain, let's call them groups of Buddhists, etc., that are never supposed to eat meat. And what I found so interesting is that as they're interviewing these people, they actually go on to show the example that a lot of these Buddhist monks actually still do eat animals. And what I actually ended up talking to one of the directors of this film, but I went on to tell him, I said, we don't really agree with your narrative at all.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that our monks don't eat meat. Like, if you have everything in the right prioritization and sequence, the second, third, fourth order effects like come into balance. Like I was kind of joking around. I was like, you might as well just become a Christian monk, because you'd achieve the same end and you'd have salvation on top of it. Like you'd save more animals. If it's such a strange thing. But again, they take sort of a piece of this aspect. Yes. And actually, it's interesting. I mean, there are canons of the church that say that clergy aren't supposed to participate in the slaughter of animals, but like that's not all we are. That's like a sentence somewhere that says that clergy are supposed to be less involved. But it's just funny how they take a piece of something and then they put it in the center and they create a documentary about it. And we're God came to this earth to save animals and not our souls. Just completely missing the point.
Well, you saw it if you ever see Darren Aronofsky's Noah. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, what a ridiculous film. Is that totally takes the same story and reinterprets it. So in his story of Noah, same thing. God came to basically say the animal and biological kingdom. And it was crazy. It was like a pro-vegan kind of film that, well, you know what the real problem is the cancer is mankind. So basically he says, well, the flood was to wipe out man and start over, and then there would be a new creation without man, and that's the highest creation is the animal king. So everything's out of order. Man is the crown of creation.
Right.
Creation serves man, and all of creation's to be humanized. Why? Because the image of the image of God is to be found in man. So paradise lost becomes paradise restored through humanizing nature, right? Which means man is the crown of creation. Totally backwards in the Noah, right?
Wow.
You have these kind of elements of truth. And I even remember, I went to, I was a Protestant going to a non-denominational evangelical school. And I remember, there were different scenes and stuff in the 90s, but one of them was in the music scene, Straight Edge. If you remember these guys. And it came from a punk band called Minor Threat. And so you had different groups in the music. You had the druggies, right? Punks that were, on drugs and stuff like that. Then you got a group that protested against that through moralism. We're going to have a moral life and no smoking, drinking, or eating meat. And I remember I couldn't stand those guys. They're straight edge. They had this was and they put X's on there, and they would actually fight people.
Over these things. Yeah.
Over these things. They would fight the other groups, and then we would fight them. And it was so crazy. But what was disturbing, I remember even, at 16, 17 years old, realizing the perversion of that, because they were atheists. That's the problem. And I'm like, this is so stupid. Yeah. Why don't you just become, like you said, why don't you just become Christian?
Yeah.
At least you'd have a grounding for your morality. You literally just making stuff up, but you're not just making it up. You're a parasite. You're pulling from Christian values and making it your own and reconstructing it into a heresy. And I even was able to see that. I wasn't even Orthodox. I was 16 years old. And I'm like, it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's the same with the movies. I'm like, it's wrong. And you if you're intuitive, you can feel that in your heart that something's off and not right about this.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that concept of alignment is so key. In fact, it kind of goes back to fasting. I like to tell people, not only are we supposed to get our lives, our communities, our nation, our culture aligned towards the highest good, God, and that's very valuable. It all has to point to that same piece. Otherwise, we're in disarray. But the next question is, how do we get to the deepest level of ourselves? How do we get every cell in our body to resonate with God? And that's where fasting, again, comes in. Like, I can literally show you how your body changes as you're moving through the liturgical calendar of the year with fasting. And it's like genius. Like, so now not only do we get our communities aligned with God, I'm getting every cell in my body to resonate with God. And that's, again, the feedback loop from the highest to the lowest in that way. Orthodoxy has it. And you were talking about, these people that, kind of do their self-directed fast. I totally agree. There's something very inauthentic about that. I think I would make the analogy. It's almost like a bodybuilder. In fact, I remember I was in college once on a rugby team, and I met these two really like jack guys, just phenomenal specimens, always in the gym. And I remember asking them, I was like, guys, you really should join the rugby team. It's like, oh, we're not really interested. It's like, what are you doing all of this for? This self-directed exercise, like, join a team, join a group, put that to use, be like, create some purpose around it. And I feel like it's the same thing with these self-directed fasts. It's almost like, yeah, they look like bodybuilders in the fasting world, but they're not part of a team or doing it for something or aligning it with something else. And it just feels kind of empty at the end of the day, and so, yeah, they ended up joining the team. They ended up joining the rugby team like the next week, and they were great players. But yeah,
that's a great. I think it was Abbot Treefon that told this story, because he used to. I think it was Abbot Treefon. Forgive me if I got the wrong priest. But was involved in when he was younger, bodybuilding, and the analogies and connections to this. And he said that he saw somebody who, was, in terms of sports and lifting and bodybuilding, you don't do it by yourself. And he gives an example where it goes wrong. He saw this guy and he's looking at himself in the mirror, right? And he only sees this part, right? And so he's all built up, upper body, and his lower body's totally sticks. And he was saying, why? Because he can't see himself. He's not outside looking at the whole. And he used this as a spiritual metaphor too, in terms of like asceticism and fasting.
Sure.
If you're doing it yourself, you're going to be all built up in one area and everything else underdeveloped. And I'm like, isn't that a great analogy?
Yeah,
that it exactly relates to what you said. It's like, if everything's not in its right place, it's out of whack. To what end? What does it serve? And to see things in terms of everything in its right proportion and hierarchy in its right place requires somebody who's outside and not you, because you're in the middle of it. You can't see all the different parts, and you don't have the 30,000-foot vista looking down on, and that's why we need orthodoxy. It has the 30,000-foot vista. It has the trainer that's going, you need to work on that too. And so there's a lot of great kind of metaphors and analogies from sports that can be applied, and maybe that's a way to kind of teach people. That's like, I could relate to that. I get what you're saying. And why, if I did it myself, something's going to be out of whack.
Yeah.
And not gonna work.
Yeah. Amen. Father, I really love the conversation. I think we did what was it? It was talk about this with Trump. He does the left and the right, and then comes back down to circle again or something. They have some type of term for that. But anyway, I think that we were very successful in exploring some of the more relevant issues specifically to men in this Orthodox world. And it's interesting how you are kind of living that in the particular state that you're in, with the community that's coming to be built up around you. I just really hope it thrives.
Yeah.
Because if there was ever a time where men need an outlet, and Orthodox Christians for that matter, or just Christians in general, need some type of recalibration, it's only going to be found in a monastery. And monasteries exist in the Orthodox faith, and it's just such a central part of that. And it's by no means an accident. I'm forgetting now who made this quote. Maybe it was St. John Climacus, but God is alike to angels. Angels are alike to monastics, and monastics are alike to us. And I think that's, like you said, everyone in the right place with the right alignment. It just makes total sense.
Yeah. And I always tell people too, there's a lot of weird views about monasticism, that it's it's the highest life of orthodoxy, and that
Yeah.
these people are just the most holiest people. If I could just touch the garment of, then I'd be healed. And monastics are not clergy unless they're a priest. They're laity. They have a different calling. It's a different way of it's intense, right? But like you said, there's that rawness. Like, they're struggling and working out their own salvation too, right? And just a different kind of mode. It's not that one's better than another. They're just different callings and different kinds of modes of existing within the Orthodox and working out your Orthodox faith. So people need to realize, because it just looks so like you do get like a concentration, right, of like what Orthodoxy is in the aesthetics, right? The look of it. Look at these guys; they look awesome. They've got these beards, and they're they've got the schema monk stuff coming down.
Right.
They're just praying all the time, and it's just a condensed version, right? But it doesn't mean that necessarily it's a higher, more privileged. It's just a different, right? And maybe you're calling, and we need each other, right? They're both equal in their dignity, even the roles are different, just like we see in the church. Everybody has a different role, right? And we can't cross, and we can't dissolve the boundaries between that, which is exactly what the modern world's doing. Between gender, I hate using the word gender because I'm not a noun. Right? I have a there's two sex. Okay, let's just be clear about that.
Yes.
But between the different sexes, there's different roles. Okay, they're both equally dignified, right? And in God's eyes, but they're different. They serve different purposes within the body of Christ. And even in the liturgical, like I said, the choir is not the cooks. They're not the altar servers. They're not everybody had it in its right place. And we have to kind of keep that. And it's just, we all need each other. If you took out, one of the pieces, the liturgy wouldn't work. It's a whole. And it's the same way with monasticism. It's not that one's more dignified. It's just a different piece, right, of the whole. And Orthodoxy cannot thrive without monasticism. There is no Orthodoxy without monasticism, just as much as there's no Orthodoxy without the parish. So
without marriage. No, and again, bring it back, and I think it's called the weave. That's what the Trump thing used to be called, the weave. But it just goes back again to such a ripe moment in American history and modern history, that there's this segment of millions of individuals that are looking for this, to fill this void. And rather than doing it through video games and the rest of it, there's already this worked out pathway that can be so epic and really can give them meaning. And for that matter, for those that don't go full time into it, it's just wonderful to retool and reboot, connecting with those places and then sort of leaving for a while for some perspective. But it definitely is peace within the storm. It really is.
And we don't have to experiment. What I mean? We don't have to experiment to see what works.
Yes.
People always ask, like, why do Orthodox do this? Well, one answer is because we always keep what's been kept. And number two, because it works.
Yes.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel and, like you said, do these things. Isn't that great? We know what works, and we are always going to keep what's been kept and what works. So with that.
Yeah, proof's in the pudding. Proof's in the pudding for millennia at this point. So Father, it's such a wonderful moment to sort of get to meet you, at least virtually here. Would love to come out to the 1,000-acre wood at some point.
Absolutely.
And just God bless your efforts out there. I know it's a beautiful part of the country, and what a perfect setting for such activities. So please keep me in your prayers, and I really appreciate your time today. It was awesome.
Yeah, God bless you, brother. Thank you, everybody.